Hello, and welcome to our podcast on synthesis. This is one of these constructed response verbs that you're going to see a lot during the school year. And so we wanted to make sure we took some time to teach exactly what we mean by this verb, and so you can understand what we want you to do when you see this in any sort of prompt throughout not only our class, but many of the classes throughout the school. So let's go ahead and see what we mean by synthesis. So the strict definition of synthesis is to take individual items and make a new product out of them. And so I think this will become a little bit more clear as to what it is when you see some examples. But as always, we wanted to give you that definition so that you just have that in your back pocket in terms of what synthesis actually dictionary-wise is. So here's some examples of synthesis in action. We'll start off here. Primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. These are considered the three essential colors by the art world. And if we go ahead and synthesize them, so for example, if we take red and yellow, two individual items, and combine them, then we make something new, which is orange. If we take red and blue and synthesize them, we put them together, we make purple. And so here is an example of synthesis, taking two individual items, processing them, thinking about them, and then combining them into something new. Now with colors, apparently there are these things called tertiary colors, or like third level of colors, which I didn't really know about, but you can see that there's an example here. So for example, if we take a darker green and we mix it with yellow and synthesize those, we get green-yellow or yellow-green. Same thing at the bottom, if we take a darker purple and a lighter purple, we get more of a royal purple. It's a little bit more red than blue. And this is really what Crayola makes their money on. Those 64 colors of crayons have moved from red, yellow, blue to all the various shades. And all they're doing is taking various elements of each of these colors and mixing them in different proportions. So they are synthesizing. They're taking unique objects, processing them, combining them, and then making something new. In this case, they're making colors. Here's another example of synthesis. For many, many years, we've had only gasoline-powered engines. At the same time, there are cars and carts and golf carts and little things like that that are electrically powered. What if we combine those, synthesize these two disparate items, the gasoline-powered and the electrical-powered, and put them together and create the hybrid? Here we have, for example, one of the many new hybrids coming out there, but the Toyota Prius. It is a car that has both a gasoline and an electric motor in it. So depending on the needs of the road, the demands of the person driving, the car can make a choice. Again, the point is, the car makers have synthesized two individual items, gasoline engine and electric engine, and put them together in something new. Before maybe 6 years ago-ish, this car didn't exist. We had seen both as individuals, gasoline and electric, but we didn't have this new hybrid. And so the car makers have synthesized. One more individual example here, we get photosynthesis. So think back to biology class, and you can look at the roots there of the word itself, and you can understand kind of what's going on. Photosynthesis is where we need two things to combine to make something new. Photo means light, and then you have chlorophyll, which is the stuff that makes leaves green. And if you put light with chlorophyll, you get energy, which is created for the plant. This allows the plant to grow and thrive and all the good stuff that it does. But again, you can see the root of synthesis in here, because synthesis is happening. Two unique items, light and chlorophyll, are combining to create something new. And that is the essence of synthesis, and that's what we're talking about today. We could go on and on of other examples of synthesis. Some are more serious than others. At the bottom, you have the broccaflower, which is a combination of broccoli and cauliflower. You have the labradoodle. You have in the upper left some of the early mountain bike attempts, where people took bikes that had a couple gears on them, and instead of having the skinny tires of road bikes, took those off and put the knobbier tires of maybe beach cruisers on them, which allowed these bikes to go down more difficult terrain. But again, the example of synthesis, taking road bike frames with gears and beach cruiser tires and putting them together to make something new, the mountain bike. Over in the bottom right, you can see the early looking of snowboarding. So we combine this idea of wanting to surf, so you're keeping both feet locked in place on a single piece of material going down some feature, just like the surfers would, but here we are doing it on the snow. So before we had snowboarding, they had what was called the snurfer, where they synthesized the sports of surfing and skiing and made this kind of pre-snowboard type thing. Again, the point is, these are all examples of synthesis, taking ideas from two or more individual things, putting them together in the mental blender, thinking about them, and then creating something new. So how do you synthesize? This is what we're going to take many steps to practice in class, and then I would advocate that you're going to need this in all of your classes throughout high school and college. But the steps seem to me to be these. Number one, we have to examine all the evidence that we are given. So oftentimes in school, this means the various texts that we are shown. It could be a political cartoon, and then a poem, and then a song, and then a novel, and then a newspaper article. We need to look at all the evidence. We can't just pick and choose and say, well, I'm kind of tired, so I'm going to read 2 of these 5 texts. No, we have to look at everything to see what we are being presented with. Number 2, we have to make sure that we understand all of those texts. Not what we want them to mean, but what they are actually saying on their own. And so this is the step that we need to take, where we use all of those great reading strategies and perhaps media viewing strategies that we've talked about. We must read each text, infer, interpret, understand where the author's coming from, understand what the author is proposing, bouncing that off of what we understand from background knowledge, but we need to completely and fully understand what each text says. Again, not what we want it to say in terms of whether it agrees or disagrees with us. We're not looking to only find texts that agree with us and our personal beliefs, but we have to fully understand each piece individually. Then, step 3, we have to put them in that mental blender. We have to say, well, what is going on here? What are these pieces of text providing me? And how can I respond to the prompt I'm being asked about? And so we have to look at this and say, interesting, text A, B, and C seem to support a certain idea, but texts D, E, and F seem to be against that. So what's the overall point of all of these texts together? And so that's where we make that synthesis jump, where we take all of these things and combine them into something new. And for the most part, since we are in an academic environment, this usually takes the following form, that we look at a bunch of documents. They could be different types. They could be multimedia, short pieces, long pieces, visual, text-based, picture-based, etc. We have to figure out what they are meaning and what they're saying, and then we have to write some sort of response, often in the form of some sort of opinion essay or a lab report or something like that, where we look at all of this, and maybe the question is global warming an important item to consider? Or should the U.S.'s foreign policy be X, Y, or Z? And so we have to offer our opinion, but we can't just speak out of thin air. We have to couch or base our opinion on what we've read. So for example, the foreign policy thing. Should our foreign policy be to invade at every opportunity? Okay, that's a question. Text A seems to point that yes, every chance we get, we should be the police force of the world. Okay, maybe text B says, well, maybe only if it's really, really important. Then text C says, no, not at all, never, ever. Interesting. We have to synthesize what all of those texts are saying, bounce them off of how we interpret all that, what our background knowledge is, where we're coming from, and then create our opinion, our response, our essay, our synthesis essay. So we're not just talking out of nowhere. We're basing our ideas off of the other texts we have been provided. But these might be a little bit heady or academic topics to start our first attempts at synthesis. So we're going to go ahead and slow down and do some practice steps, maybe along the lines of these. So ask yourself, how do you decide which movie to go to on the weekend with your groups of friends? How do you decide which latest, greatest tech thingy to buy? How do you decide which outfit to wear on the first date? most likely you don't say, okay, well, me by myself, I'm going to go watch this movie A. No, you're probably going to ask a bunch of people, weigh those opinions, those comments, and then make a decision. You are, in effect, synthesizing because you're hearing from your parents on this, from your friends, from the newspaper, from a website review, from your worst enemy. You're hearing all these different individual texts, and you are creating something new, which is a decision. And so you are synthesizing. And so we're going to take a look at some of these in a little bit more depth with a little bit slower pace behind it so that we can practice the mental steps involved in synthesizing. And then we're going to ratchet it up a little bit more, adding those academic topics, tying this back into our class, both government, economics, and literature pieces. So you have synthesized when you have made a decision on any one of these. Your texts may be people's opinions. Your texts may be a picture from a fashion magazine, something you saw on the latest, greatest reality show, what your best friend says, what your sister says, what your parents say. Those are all texts. You're examining the credibility of those. So, hey, your best friend says you should wear this to the first date, but she seems to be kind of a train wreck. So you discredit what she says, but at the very least, you hear what she has to say. Your other best friend says you should wear a suit and tie. Okay, that person has a lot of credibility in your eyes, so maybe you follow his advice. And then ultimately, you have created something new, and that is that decision. So you are synthesizing already. We just want to make those thinking steps very obvious and very clear in a non-academic setting, and then moving them back to academic settings as we go. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and stop the podcast now. That's kind of the end of this. We're going to do some practice in class and kind of move you guys forward. But please remember what synthesis is. It is the idea of taking a few different texts as individual things, fully understanding where they're coming from and what they're saying and what they're advocating for, and then processing it in your own mental blender, and then creating something new out of it. And so you do this every day when you make decisions. But we're going to tie this back to the academic classroom and say, how do we put all these things together in some sort of essay or opinion essay or a lab report and focus it back on the academic side? So that's about it for now. As always, if you have any questions, please bring those into class. We'll get those answered, and we'll be moving forward with some practice opportunities. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon.